You may remember the song Sexy Back by Justin Timberlake from quite a few years ago. For this episode, though, I want to do a special mix for you all, headliner style. We're talking quarterbacks. My calls are mostly hits, now that's a fact. Start and sit, that's what we do. The fantasy headliner's here for you. Headliner Nation, what's going on? Kyle coming to you from the Draft.com studios with another episode of the Fantasy Headliners. And now I've got the pipes warmed up. The vocals are ready to roll. No, I'm not going to sing again. Maybe we'll save that for a live show in the future. I am ready to talk about quarterbacks for week 7 of the fantasy football season. But before we jump into all of that information, as always, we're going to be transparent about our calls the week beforehand. And boy, was I bummed to see that I missed 70% by one quarterback. It was tearing me up the last couple of days. I promised you we were going to get to 70%. Just missed out on it. This next week, though, I'm feeling it. We're going to get back there. Unfortunately, I don't have any updated accuracy rankings from Fantasy Pros right now, so it looks like there might be a couple of days behind updating that information. For week 5 of the season, I was 5th overall of about 135 experts. I'm right in that 24th range right now overall for the season. So, really hoping to reinforce that, but I'll keep you all updated when we get to the ranking show later in the week. I'll make sure I throw that information out there for you, let you know how we're still doing here on the Fantasy Headliners. But without further ado, it's time to jump into it. Let's talk about quarterbacks. Thursday Night Football is going to bring Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs into Denver against Joe Flacco and the Broncos. We've got one of each in this category. So we've got Patrick Mahomes as a start. We've got Joe Flacco as a sit. I wanted to put Joe Flacco as a start. I really thought about it for a while, but quite honestly, he just hasn't had any type of a ceiling this year and hasn't even been close to 18 points per game. So I just couldn't do it. Patrick Mahomes, though, he's always going to be a start. Yes, it's a Thursday night. Yes, it's on the road. Yes, it's against a Denver team that has given up the third fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, but it's Patrick Mahomes. And now that Tyreek Hill is back, I think you're going to see this offense start to get back to a little bit more of what we saw last year in terms of that explosiveness. So might see a little bit of it this week in Denver. It's going to be a really tough game, though. And quite honestly, with Patrick Mahomes, all season long, I've had him up like QB 1, 2, 3, I think has been the lowest I've had him all season. However, I think I'm going to have him a little bit further back, maybe that 5 to 7 range, because I do think his upside might be limited a little bit in this matchup. With Joe Flacco, going to be a sit for me. He's averaging 12.6 point per games right now, which is actually worse than Marcus Mariota, who was just benched by the Tennessee Titans. He only has one multiple TD game, and for 300 yards, he's only thrown for it once. So only 300 yards once, only one game with multiple touchdowns. Again, not nearly enough upside there for me. We're going to go ahead and list him as a sit, even though this will probably be a pretty good matchup for him. I just don't see it this year. No reason to try and grab him and stream him in what looks like an appealing matchup. The Rams and the Falcons. Can Jared Goff bounce back this week? Yes, I think that he does. A very disappointing game last week, but this is a good matchup for him to get back on a roll and for this offense to get going again. For Matt Ryan, though, he has thrown for at least 300 yards in every single game this season, and he has at least 3 touchdowns in 4 games as well. I've heard a lot of people saying that at the beginning of the season, like, oh man, Matt Ryan's not really doing a whole lot for me. Should I have really trusted him? But the guy's been good. I just don't think he's been talked about enough. And one of the reasons he's been so good is because his defense has been so poor, especially against the pass. Goff is coming off a game in which he went 13 to 24 for 78 yards, but the defense has been giving up a lot of points. And even though we're going to be adding Jalen Ramsey to the mix, I still think Matt Ryan is going to throw for enough yards in this offense for Atlanta is going to roll enough that Jared Goff is going to have to throw as well. The Falcons are giving up 24.5 points to opposing quarterbacks right now, second most in the National Football League. So again, I think this is a matchup where we could see a little bit back and forth. I know a lot of people are not trusting Jared Goff. However, if you really need a streamable option this week, this is the one matchup this week that I see that Jared Goff, you could pick him up because a lot of people probably dropped him. you could grab him and stream him against Atlanta and probably get pretty decent output. Matt Ryan, he's a must start. Keep him in your lineup. If things couldn't get any worse for the Miami Dolphins, well, they get to head into Buffalo playing a very good defense that is now coming off a bye. So for Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm pulling the plug on him this week. Not even interested in it. The Bills are only giving up 10.3 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's fourth fewest, in the National Football League. And this is a guy that was benched as well for Josh Rosen. Josh Rosen now heading back to the bench as well. So I don't love this matchup for Ryan Fitzpatrick at all. However, for Josh Allen, absolutely love the matchup. And quite honestly, I think he's going to be a top 5 quarterback for me this week. Miami giving up the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 24.82. Again, like I mentioned, they're coming off the bye. That's a plus. That's giving them some extra time to get ready. The only thing that's going to limit their upside or limit Allen's upside is if we see a whole lot of Gore and a whole lot of Singletary. That obviously could keep them down a little bit. But the Miami Dolphins have been giving up points to opposing quarterbacks all season long. So I don't expect it to be any less this week with Josh Allen. Minshew Mania may have let some of us down last week, but I expect a bounce back performance for him as well. And Andy Dalton, I'm going to ride him again this week. I think he's going to give you more than enough opportunities to be able to be a quarterback one. Believe it or not, with as bad as they've looked, he's the QB12 right now. So keep that in mind as we go through this matchup. With Minshew, he's only really had one bad game. Last week was only his second interception on the season. And Cincinnati's giving up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks as well. With Andy Dalton, the volume alone has been able to keep him in the conversation for a weekly QB1 situation. He's the quarterback 12 in fantasy leagues right now. He's had at least 35 passing attempts in every game this season. So he's going to throw a lot, especially this week when the Jaguars, more than likely the Jaguars are going to be able to run the ball and throw the ball. So keep an eye on that. Leonard Fournette should have a good game. Gardner Minshew should have a good game. Andy Dalton will probably have to throw a lot again. Again, another streaming option that could help get you through week 7 if you're going to be missing a quarterback. Kirk Cousins has been able to turn it around a little bit, and Matthew Stafford is coming off a heartbreaking loss at Green Bay last week. Kirk Cousins over the last 2 weeks has been the quarterback 5, so that's how this offense has started to roll, started to break out a little bit. Can they keep it going against Detroit? Honestly, they've been about a middle of the road in terms of stopping quarterbacks. And again, Detroit is coming off a tough loss at Green Bay. What kind of a team are we going to get back? Is this going to be a team that bounces back and says, you know what? At home against Minnesota, we're going to shut these guys down. Or are they going to break? The Lions of old, they would break. They would get torched this game. However, the new Lions, a Lion team that seems to have a lot of fight in them this year, could bounce back. So I'm going to list him as a start. It could end up being a tough game. It could go either way, but I think he gets enough opportunity, and the offense is playing well enough right now to get him those 18 points and be a start for us this week. With Matthew Stafford, he performed well at the Packers last week. They just weren't able to punch it in enough. Way too many field goals. If they would have converted some of those field goals into touchdowns, Matthew Stafford probably would have had a lot better game, and the Lions probably would have won, to be honest with you, even with some of those awful calls. But he's only thrown an interception in one game this season, so he's keeping the ball fairly clean, limiting those turnovers. That's big. Even though he didn't have the upside last week, he actually had a pretty decent game. He just didn't get as many opportunities as we would have hoped to get into the end zone. This week could end up being a lot different against Minnesota. We'll go ahead and toss Aaron Rodgers back into the lineup here for week 7 against the Oakland Raiders. But for Derek Carr, he's going to go ahead and be a sit for me. Green Bay's been tough. 6th fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks, 12.76. And Carr has done a decent job of taking care of the ball this year, but he just hasn't had a ton of big plays. So he's had a decent amount of volume. He just hasn't had a lot of yards with it. Tyrell Williams, will he end up missing this week? Right now, it seems like he could end up being doubtful or questionable at best, dealing with some plantar fasciitis. So we'll see what happens with that. If he's missing Tyrell Williams, that's a huge hit to this offense. With Aaron Rodgers, he's only been over 300 yards once this season, and he hasn't thrown for 3 TDs in a game yet. The wide receiver core is also going to be a bit limited. We'll have to wait and see how things progress through this week, but he could be dealing with some injuries to his wide receivers. So even though the matchup is really, really good, I'm just going to say I think he's still limited on his upside this season just because we haven't seen it. I know he had a pretty good game last week against Detroit. However, a couple of those throws, some of those stats that he was able to build up at the end of the game may have not happened if it wasn't for some blown calls from the referees. And we're not going to get into that here. Obviously, there were some really bad calls. But even with that being said, not talking about the outcome itself, if some of those calls hadn't been made, Rodgers may not have gotten as many opportunities as he did at the end of the game. So his numbers last week could have looked a lot worse than what they did. Doesn't matter though. They ended up happening. He had a good week last week. He could potentially have another good week here in week 7. In this matchup, we've got Deshaun Watson, who everyone knows about, and Jacoby Brissett, who really, for the most part this year, has flown under the radar. One thing I just want to keep in mind with Deshaun Watson, he's a must start. He's the quarterback 3 in fantasy football right now, but he has a rushing touchdown in all but 2 games this season. That really helps push his ceiling to a whole nother level. Against the Indianapolis Colts, you could see some of the same. In the red zone, running them some of those run-pass options, which really works for this team. Number one, because Carlos Hyde has actually been playing pretty well. If Duke Johnson is in the backfield, he's a receiving threat. You have multiple receiving threats, whether it be Will Fuller, DeAndre Hopkins, even the tight ends are playing very well this season for the Houston Texans. So the offense is doing well. Deshaun Watson at the forefront of that is a must-start every single week. Now, with Jacoby Brissett, again, been a little bit under the radar, but he's played really, really well this year. The Houston Texans are giving up over 19 points per game to opposing quarterbacks right now, which is excellent. And Jacoby Brissett has multiple touchdowns in all but 1 game this season. That's excellent to see for him. Coming off the bye, the Colts are going to be ready for this matchup. They get it at home. Jacoby Brissett is going to be a nice option for you to put in your lineup this week as well. Before the season started, if I would have said, you know what, week 7, I'm really looking forward to the Arizona Cardinals and the New York Giants from a fantasy football perspective, you probably would have been thinking, what in the world is Kyle on right now? But not going to lie, this week I'm looking forward to this matchup. 2 young quarterbacks, Kyler Murray has done very well this season. Daniel Jones, been a little bit of a roller coaster, but he's had some shining moments. What are we going to get from these 2 guys this week? Both teams are top 5 in most points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks, and both of these quarterbacks are able to add a little bit extra on the ground as well. Both of them can run a little bit with their feet, pick up some extra yards in the ground. We could also possibly see some touchdowns on the ground from these guys. So I like their ceilings this week. Neither defense is really going to be able to stop the other. So there is a possibility we see some points in this matchup. I don't think it's going to be a shootout by any means. I don't think we're looking at 60 total points or anything like that. But I think we get more than enough out of these quarterbacks to be good starts for us this week. Jimmy G and the undefeated 49ers get to head out to Washington this week. And with Case Keenum, I'm going to go ahead and bench him this week. Yes, they've had some upside this season. Him and Terry McLaurin have worked really well together. But I can't do it. The San Francisco defense is legit. I know a lot of people were saying, you know what, they haven't played a great defense, or they haven't played a really good offense yet. They haven't improved anything. Well, I tell you what, they held Jared Goff to 78 yards last week. And even though that Los Angeles Rams offense hasn't been the same as the last couple of years, it still has a lot of really good players on it. And San Francisco was able to go into Los Angeles and really take that game and run away with it. So I'm not going to start Case Keenum. I think it's too much of an issue this week. I'm not excited for that. For Jimmy Garoppolo, though, I am going to go ahead and play him. I'm going to list him as a start. He hasn't been great for fantasy-related purposes. He's been a good quarterback this year, but for fantasy-related purposes, he hasn't overall been that great. But this matchup is too good. He's got a lot of opportunities here. Here's the thing. I don't think he's a quarterback 1 this week by any means. So if you are a 12-team league, more than likely you're not going to be starting Garoppolo. However, I will go ahead and put him kind of in that high QB2 range and leave him right around there because I still think he's going to hit those 18 points. He hasn't done a whole lot for fantasy purposes this year, and the rushing attempts that the 49ers have done all season, that's what really has limited that upside. So if they do the same thing against Washington, a lot of rushing attempts, a lot of the running backs, Jimmy Garoppolo again limited somewhat. My bold call of the week is going to be starting Ryan Tannehill. Now, the Los Angeles Chargers have not looked great in recent weeks. Now, the Tennessee Titans offense has been a roller coaster this season, and that's why I'm going to start Ryan Tannehill, because at times this offense has looked really good. A.J. Brown has looked really good. Corey Davis, he's had his moments. Delaney Walker's been a reliable weapon. The backfield with Derrick Henry, yes, they didn't have a great week last week, but Derrick Henry's had a pretty good season up to this point. That's why I'm going to put Ryan Tannehill as a start this week. I think he does just enough. I don't think he's going to throw for like 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, but I definitely think that we could see about 250, 2 touchdowns this week. I like him this week, and it's a gut call. This is a gut call. It's a bold call, but I think he gets it done this week. With Phillip Rivers, also going to list him as a start, even in a matchup again. And the matchup is going to be tough for either of these teams. Los Angeles is no slouch when it comes to stopping the passing game. Same thing goes with Tennessee. But both of these quarterbacks are going to be a start for me this week. Rivers, he's been a little up and down as this year as well, but he has 290 yards in all but one game this season. So again, kind of the same thing I said a couple of minutes ago with Jimmy Garoppolo. Maybe not a lock solid quarterback 1, but right around that low QB1, high QB2 range. So again, like in a 12-team league, you're probably not going to really rely on either of these guys this week. However, if you're in a super flex, a 2 QB league, if you're in like a 16-team league, something like that, both of these guys could end up being decent runs for you this week, putting them in your lineup. On the flip side of that, now I've got a couple of quarterbacks that we're going to be sitting here. Teddy Bridgewater, a really tough Chicago Bears defense, only giving up 11 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks right now. That right there is enough to say, not going to trust Teddy Bridgewater. The Bears are also coming off the bye as well. And those teams that are coming off the bye, when they get a little extra time to prepare, that could make a lot of difference for them. So with Teddy Bridgewater, I'm going to go ahead and send this week. Chase Daniel, he gets a decent matchup. New Orleans has been giving up a lot of yards through the air this year. However, this Saints defense can be really boom or bust sometimes. Yes, they'll look really, really bad sometimes, but at other times, they can make a lot of things happen. They can get in the backfield. They can get some picks. They can disrupt some passes. So I think this is one of the boom weeks for them. I think that they're going to be able to keep this offense limited. Chicago has an opportunity to make a statement against the Saints this week at home. It's going to be a tough game, though. It could end up going either way. But for the quarterbacks, I just don't think either of them have enough upside this week. One of the best games to watch for quarterbacks this week is going to be the Fantasy Football Quarterback 1 in Lamar Jackson and the Fantasy Football Quarterback 2 and Russell Wilson. Both of these guys have been excellent this year, and I really, really liked my Lamar Jackson call last week. One of the things that I mentioned was we could really see those feet get going again, and that could help with some other things as well. But a historic performance for Lamar Jackson, doing something last week, running the ball and passing the ball that nobody has ever done, including Michael Vick. Now with Russell Wilson, the guy hasn't even thrown an interception yet this year. Not only has he put up a lot of volume, but he's been super efficient with all of it as well. We're going to start both of these guys. Both of these guys will be high-end quarterback 1s for me this week. And if you own them, you feel safe with them. Now, this matchup, Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott, yes, I'm going to list them as sits, but I'm going to be honest with you. I think this is one of the most volatile games of the week because this could either end up turning into a shootout with these teams going back and forth the entire game, or this could end up turning into a defensive battle. I honestly don't see anything in between. Either we see a lot of points or we don't see a whole lot of points. But both of these quarterbacks are both top 9 in fantasy football points right now. Carson Wentz has continued to perform well. When I list him as a sit, Eagles Nation, you come after me. You get on me a little bit. I'm going to have him as a start this week, though. And we've talked about a little bit about him, even though he has a really good playoff schedule, his next few weeks are really tough. This could be a little bit more of a tough matchup for him. The Eagles, they haven't been able to stop the pass very often. I mean, they got torched last week, obviously, by Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings. Will they be able to stop Dak Prescott this week? We will see, but I'm going to give both of these guys the benefit of the doubt. We're going to put them both in our lineup this week, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed that it ends up being a shootout and not a defensive battle. Monday Night Football, the New England Patriots at the New York Jets. And I struggled with this game a little bit because, quite honestly, I was going to list Tom Brady as a set. I changed my mind, put him back as a start, only put Sam Darnold over in the sit column from right now. And let me tell you, with Sam Darnold, we talked about Sam Darnold in our buy low, sell high episode that we did this week. He has an awesome schedule the rest of the way. So if you own Sam Darnold, just put them on the bench this week. This is going to be a really tough matchup. Yes, they looked really good last week, but I expect them to look really great the rest of the season. They're facing a New England defense that is giving up the fewest amount of points to opposing quarterbacks right now. They could be limiting this offense a little bit more this week, and I really honestly could see this being a defensive battle in New York on Monday Night Football, a tough, hard-nosed matchup. It could end up being that. Tom Brady, I think he ends up doing just enough. He always has so far this season, doing just enough to be in there. Yes, last week could have been a little bit better. However, this is a team that will continue to roll on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. It's going to be a really close matchup, though. That's why I think Tom Brady does just enough, because it's not like they're going to run away with it. I don't think they're going to step on the Jets and take over and focus on the run game. I think this is going to be a close game the entire way. Tom Brady's going to have to throw it the entire time. He probably does just enough. With Sam Darnold again, I love him the rest of the season. Just don't love the matchup, so I don't want to risk it this week. Headliner Nation, do me a favor, hit the like button on the video. If you appreciated the content, if you got something from this episode, we appreciate those likes. It means a lot to us, so hit that like button if you did. For all of you, though, who have not become a part of Headliner Nation yet, hit that subscribe button. I guarantee that you will not be disappointed. Subscribe to the Fantasy Headliners. Hit that notification bell so every time we go live, Saturday nights at 9 Eastern, or anytime we drop content every day of the week, you're going to be notified right away, and you can get right to it. Also, don't be afraid to leave a comment below. Let us know if you got any questions. We try to respond to as many people as we possibly can. But unless you leave a comment, you don't know if you're going to get an answer. So leave a comment below if you want to. Headliner Nation, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. Don't worry, I'm not going to go ahead and sing for you again. We're going to go ahead and cut this one out now, though. Have a great one, everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks.